Well, good evening and welcome everybody to this CCS show and tell meeting on railways, especially for members. If we haven't met before, I'm Jerry Zieler, the chairman of CCS, but tonight the chairman of this session is Stuart Dennison, who is full size on screen at the moment. Stuart is a CCS committee member and a railway buff himself, who has kindly invited 6 of us to present a wide variety of slides. I'm running the Zoom system here in London. Stuart's where he is, and he'll work the slides for speakers and introduce them. And this is being recorded for use on YouTube, so I will be muting all as we go through the evening. And if you'd like to ask questions, please save them until after the speakers have finished, or better still, put them in chat, because we can deal with them as we go through and refer them to each individual speaker, if that is a good idea. Thank you. And now over to Stuart for tonight's Railway Show and Tell.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Jerry. We start we're in England and Scotland with one notable exception. We start with David Fairbairn. If we got David, and if David can be unmuted. Do we have David? We do.
Yeah. Am I unmuted now?
Yeah, you're unmuted. So what I'll do now, that we're going to start with early lines, and these are in the northeast. And I'll just screen share, and I'll say to all the speakers, if you need a nudge, if I've not got it quite right as to when to move on with the slide, so just say. So if I start the screen sharing. No from the spot. Right, David Fairbairn, over to you.
Okay, this is just a very short miscellany of material that should probably take 5 minutes or so to go through. And it is triggered by the fact that I was quite interested in the actual creator of one of my favorite maps, which is a map showing railways in the northeast of England. And this map was created by somebody called Mark Lambert, who was an engraver at the turn of the 19th century. And if we move to the next slide, I think we can see a kind of calling card of Lambert. He was a native of Newcastle upon Tyne. His dates, if I can get them correctly, are 1781 to 1855. He was apprenticed to Thomas Bewick, who, of course, was the most famous and has been the most famous English engraver. Bewick was the creator of some wonderful natural scenes around his native Tyneside. And Bewick actually was involved in the coal trade in the sense that his father owned a coal mine and was obviously interested in the transport of coal from the mine to further shipment areas from the banks of the Tyne. But Bewick himself had very little to do with the coal industry. And so we're going to sort of move aside from Bewick and concentrate on his apprentice, Mark Lambert, who created, if we have a look at the next slide, a map showing some of the railways, the wagonways as they were called in those days. This map dates from 1807. And it is probably the second after a map 20 years earlier that showed the regional extent of wagonways in the northeast of England. The wagonways are actually very faintly indicated on this map by pecked dotted lines. And these, of course, were mainly wooden railed means of transporting coal from the collieries around Tyneside and into County Durham down to the stays on the Tyne and on the North Sea, from whence they were shipped. The cargo was shipped to London. The development of the railways in this part of the world was very much involved with the creation of the Great North Coalfield, which was the largest coalfield in the world at the time, at the turn of the 19th century. And the means of transport was so well developed, although it wasn't actually invented in the Northeast. We sometimes claim up here in the Northeast that we are the home of railways, but in fact, iron rails and even previously wooden rails were developed further south much earlier. But they certainly matured up here, and to the extent that railways and tracked vehicle systems were referred to as Newcastle roads throughout the world, I think, in the early part of the 19th century. But as you can see, this particular map, I suspect, was probably engraved on copper rather than on wood, which is what Lambert learnt his trade on. And this particular map was produced in 1807 as almost the first product of Lambert's company that he set up at about that time. As I say, it's a regional map. It's quite different to the previous mapping of railways that was done probably on a colliery by colliery basis by engineering surveyors. Lambert himself was an engraver. He wasn't a surveyor. However, the next map that we're going to see, sorry, next slide. Actually, sorry, this is the colophon from this particular 1807 map. So this is the next map that I wanted to show you, which is produced by somebody who was a surveyor, a chap called John Thomas William Bell, who created a wonderful series of half a dozen 2.5 inch to the mile maps of the Great Northern Coalfield. This is sheet 3, I think, and as you can see from the dedication to George Stephenson, it very much concentrated on the railways that were used to collect the output from the mines and transport them to the stays on the riverside and at the coast at places like Seaham. These particular maps were lithographed by Lambert, and by the time of this map, which is 1847, Lambert had been joined by his son, Mark William Lambert, and these two themselves created a wonderful set of outputs that concentrated on mapping from their engraving workshop in Newcastle upon Tyne. Next slide, I think, shows the compilation of Bell's 2.5 inch to the mile maps, the half dozen sheets, reduced to 1 inch to the mile by Lambert, and this is the kind of output that results from this. This particular map, I think, is dated about 1850. And if we move to the legend, the next slide shows the legend of this map. We can see that in addition to having the private railways that serviced the collieries, public railways, which weren't restricted to the output from the collieries and occasionally took passengers, although they were mainly directed towards transporting agricultural produce and other mining outputs apart from coal. Public railways and private railways are distinguished on this particular map. 1850, as I say, engraved by Mark and Mark William Lambert. The final slide, which I think is the next one, is showing a derivation from this particular series. Sorry, this is an example of an enlargement from that particular 1 inch map, and I think you would agree that it's actually a very high quality production. And it shows the numerous wagonways as well as the public railways, and the railway that sort of sweeps around to the west side of this map, around Long Benton and past the L and the A of Northumberland, is the Newcastle and Berwick Railway, which is one of the first railways in this part of the world. Certainly predates the Newcastle and Carlisle line. But the final slide, which is the next one, is a derivation from this particular data. And it's an example of a tourist guide. And this is one of my favorite maps of all time. You can see the material, the design, and the base mapping is identical to the derivation of the William Bell maps, John Thomas William Bell maps, but certain things have been added to it, and this is from a tourist guide of 1867, and map no acknowledgement to the original mapping of John Thomas William Bell, and it is presumably for a completely different market, for the tourist market. And so what I've done in this particular slide is an example of how remapping railways started at the 19th century, compiling together some of the maps, collieries from earlier, how the masterwork of railway surveying and mapping northeast in the 1850s by Bell was then engraved and lithographed by Lambert, and the use of Lambert of this particular mapping to create something completely different, ignoring all the copyright, to create his own map. So I finished by not mentioning Ordnance Survey at all in the whole of my presentation. So that's my introduction to the mapping of railways.
Thanks very much, David. And if I can say, you did mention Ordnance Survey, if I need to say that you weren't going to mention it. They're excellent. All the questions where in any regard, you can put them in chat and we'll do them all at the finish. But if we can move on to the next one, which is rather different. It's the proposed line. And we're going up to Glasgow, and I'll introduce Gilbert. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Gilbert.
Right. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
fine.
Okay.
Well, I can anyway.
Right. Well, what I'm about to talk about is the Glasgow and North Western Railway, rather lesser known than the London and North Western Railway. But this was a line from Glasgow to Inverness, promoted in the early 1880s, and which was never built. It's associated with the North British Railway, although how much they were involved, at least in the early stages, is open to question. The main promoters were a firm called Wilkinson and Jarvis, contractors and engineers of 3 Victoria Street, London. So therefore, this was a contractor's line. Although if you were a Highland laird at the time, you would probably classify it as a London speculator's line. It did not look, at least in the early stages, for local support from the landowners in the area, and I think this is one of the reasons, amongst others, why it never got terribly far, unlike the approach in the later of the later West Highland Railway. Now, as you can see here, this is the cover of the map. It came to Parliament in the 1882-1883 session. I know that maps are prepared for parliamentary proceedings. I don't claim to be an expert in that subject, but I think that there's one in style, which is what I'm showing you here, related to land ownership, and there would be plans possibly at 6 inches to the mile showing the route in detail. I don't know whether this is an official map or not. My hunch is possibly not. The man who's named here, James Thompson, later, well, assuming I've got the right person, Sir James Thompson, he was the general manager of the Caledonian Railway from 1882 to 1900. and the Caledonian Railway was one of the main opponents of the line. So it may well have been something we prepared in his office. It also mentions an even less well-known Strathendrick and Aberfoyle Extension Railway, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. The Highland Railway was very virulently opposed to this for fairly obvious reasons, although I have read that Inverness, the town council in Inverness, was quite keen on it because they presumably saw it as breaking the Highland Railway's monopoly and possibly making things cheaper for the people in business in Inverness. At the time of this proposal, the line from Glasgow to Inverness went via Forres and was 207 miles. The Glasgow North Western Railway would have cut this to 165 miles, so more than 40 miles less. And even today, the Glasgow North Western would be 15 to 20 miles less than the current line via Aviemore. Sorry, can I have the next slide, please? Now, this is the map here. It's 15 sheets of the Ordnance Survey first edition of Scotland, the outline version, which have been put together. And as you can see, it's somewhat unwieldy. It certainly doesn't fit on my dining room table, and here it is on the floor of my sitting room. So if I want to examine it, I need to get down on my hands and knees, which means I don't tend to look at it terribly often, but it's an interesting map nonetheless. The sheets are slightly cropped at the top and the bottom, and the map, its total length is 3.2 meters, and most of it is 1.3 meters across. So again, every time I unfold it, I fear that it's going to fall to bits, but I've survived so far. I haven't checked the states of all the maps in detail, but if you look in the bottom right-hand corner is Glasgow, and that is taken from a state. There is some marginalia at the very bottom and the very top, and that is taken from, it says it is from, let me get this right, published 1866, taken from an electrotype in 1880. And for those who are interested, I think it fits between the states 7 and 8 in Helier and Oliver, but there's not time just now to go into the details of why I think it's maybe between those two. I also looked further up on the western side at the sheet number 45 Oban. It conforms to an electrotype taken in 1876. It shows the line to Dalmally, which was opened in May 1877 on the engraving, but the line to Oban is shown, but it's been added by hand. It's only added by hand. So I think we can fairly safely say that these would have been the states that were available in the early 1880s, and it says on the front cover that the map was produced in 1883, and I think that's late 1882, 1883 would certainly be logical compared with what I've been able to see here. If you look at the map, you can see the line. Unfortunately, I can't show you here with a pointer, but you can see the line running up the east side of Loch Lomond. It then goes up Glenfalloch to Crianlarich, Tyndrum. Yeah, thanks very much, Stuart. And then it was up, you see the bulge to the west. That is going round Loch Tulla. Then it was up through Glencoe, down to Loch Leven, and then pretty well straight up from there up to Inverness. So the last 60 or 70 miles, at least, is pretty straight. And of course, the current West Highland Railway, it goes up to Crianlarich and Tyndrum, then goes off somewhat to the northwest on the east side of Loch Tulla, up to Rannoch, then up through Carewer, Loch Treig, up to Tulloch, and then west via Spian Bridge down to Fort William that way. So a somewhat different route. You will see when I show you the later slides, you'll see that the line of route has not been added very subtly. It's like a sort of heavy felt pen that's been added with. So how accurate the route is, I'm not entirely sure. So next slide, please. Now here we can see Glasgow on the bottom right corner, and you can see the line is kind of splodged, if you like, coming out from the Glasgow Dumbarton Helensburgh Railway, leaving it that near the current Summerston station, a bit before Maryhill. And then you can see the line going north, and there's also a connection from the Mulgai branch, which you can see Mulgai branch extended, and then it goes up from through the Blaine Valley to cross over the Forth and Clyde Junction Railway between Drimmen and Kildarvan stations. And at this junction, there would have been when the lines crossed, there would have been a junction to allow through running from the Forth and Clyde Junction Railway as well. So what I've done here is I've split the map into, there's 8 different sections. It's still a little bit small, I'm afraid, but if I tried to make everything exceedingly legible, it would probably take about 50 slides, which is not really practical in a 10-minute talk. Next slide, please, Stuart. So there we are coming up. You can see at the bottom there where we cross the Forth and Clyde Junction Railway. And it goes up the east side of Loch Lomond from Balmaha, and you'll see another line joining in at Inversnaid. Now this is the Strathendrick and Aberfoyle extension railway. That extended from the Blaine Valley Railway at Dumgoyne to Aberfoyle using a bit of the Forth and Clyde Junction in August 1882. And I think that was originally, from one source I looked at, that was originally proposed as the Strathendrick and Loch Lomond Railway, which would have gone on from Aberfoyle to Inversnaid. Now, apparently, the main landowner in the area, the Duke of Montrose, was against this. Whether this was because it went across his land, or whether perhaps more reasonably he felt it'd be a complete waste of time financially, I don't know. But in any event, he was the chairman of the Strathendrick and Aberfoyle Railway, and so nothing happened. Then in 1882, something had changed, possibly the promotion of Glasgow and North Western, maybe the fact that the Callander and Oban line had been built at this time, which meant that it was now proposed to have an extension from Aberfoyle up to Crianlarich. It would certainly be an additional route into the Glasgow and North Western, which could be used from the Central Belt. The Strathard Heritage website says that it got an act in November 1882, but I can find no evidence of this, so I'm not entirely sure how accurate all the information is here. But certainly this railway was proposed to go up to Crianlarich, although no further action was ever taken. Next slide, please. So you can see here at the bottom, the line running up Glenfalloch. It would be to the eastern side of the glen rather than the current West Highland Railway, which is on the western side. And at Crianlarich, it's, as seen, again, not terribly clear the rather amateurish way it's been drawn on. But at that point, the Strathendrick line joins the Callander and Oban, and there's a junction a bit further north at Tyndrum from the Glasgow and North Western. Now, I believe the Glasgow and North Western would have been on a line or an elevation slightly lower than the current West Highland, which would have meant that they were able to make this junction in Tyndrum. Whether MD would ever have made 2 junctions onto the Callander and Oban seems a bit doubtful, but since neither of them were ever built, it's maybe a little bit academic. So you can see going further north, the bulge out to the left. I bought this map, must have been about 30 years ago now from a second-hand bookshop in Glasgow. And I thought when I first looked at this this would have been this was the horseshoe curve, but of course it's not. It's an entirely wrong place. The horseshoe curve is further south, and the current West Highland line goes up the other side of the valley. So you can see at where it goes round Loch Tulloch, that's where the current West Highland line would have diverged. You may ask, why is the current line taking a different route? My understanding is that it was cheaper to build that way, although I think somewhat longer. So, next slide, please. You can see now the line goes on through Glencoe down to Loch Leven, where it turns right to go across at the Dog Ferry across Loch Leven to the other side. As a non-surveyor, I did wonder, would it not be more sensible to have taken it west at the mouth of the River Leven through Ballaghoolish? So yeah, that's better. Ballaghoolish, which is more populated, but apparently it would have involved much heavier earthworks. This is presumably why they took it round by this somewhat roundabout route, and Ballaghoolish would have been served by a ferry, which doesn't sound terribly be helpful. And then once it's got past Ballaghoolish Ferry, where the road bridge is now, it turns up into Loch Linney to go northwards, and at the very top of that map, you'll see it's reached Fort William. So next slide, please.
Lost my mouse. Sorry about that.
So you can see Fort William in the bottom left there. The current Mallaig branch would go off to the west, and I don't know, the line to Spian Bridge would formed a more along a road along, I think probably the main road there, went along the current line to Spian Bridge went along there, a more northeasterly direction. And then when you come up to Loch Lochy, the Invergarry Fort Augustus Railway would have joined basically at Garlochy at the south end, or the route of this line would have been the same as the Invergarry Fort Augustus Railway from the south end of Loch Lochy. And then we go up Loch Lochy and onto the next slide again, please. You'll see up pretty much as far as I can see along the line of the Invergarry Fort Augustus line, which was an unsuccessful branch, which closed the passengers in the early 30s, up to Fort Augustus at the south end, at the south end of Loch Ness. It didn't go through it was about half a mile or a mile to the east of Fort Augustus. And then from there, it went up the east side of Loch Ness. Now, the east side of Loch Ness is less populated, but I think it would have been a shorter route to reach up to Inverness. Now, again, I believe that some parts of the line at least would have been on a causeway at the side of the loch. So good luck if you tried to get planning permission for that these days, but it would certainly have been quite a spectacular line. And I've also read that the southern section of Loch Ness was surveyed by someone going up on the Loch steamer. Now, whether that's true or not, I have no real idea. So the next slide, please. Yeah, this just takes us up through Loch Ness. There don't there's very much to say there, except it was going pretty straight route up through Foyers, and then onto the final slide, which takes us into Inverness. So you see, it would approach Inverness from the south. I believe it was planned to have its own station in South Inverness, although that's not very clear from this map here. And there would also have been a junction with the Highland Railway to allow it access to their main station. There's a little bit of line at the very northern part there. I'm not sure whether there was certainly intended to be an extension to the harbour in Inverness. How accurate that is as a representation of that is open to some doubt. So that was the railway taking up to Inverness, trying to do a quick survey of what that would have involved. I think the most interesting question in my mind here is, would it still be here today if it had actually been built? Of course, that's an unanswerable question, but given that the line to Fort William and Mallaig has survived, and one would assume that the West Highland as we know it would not have been built, at least some of it might well have survived. I'm not sure that there would have been enough, whether two main lines into Inverness could have survived, especially through the 1960s, plus, of course, the line from Aberdeen, which I rather discount in here, although trying to close what we currently have as the Highland Main Line, I think would have created a large political outcry throughout that part of Scotland. Although the line was never built, it did have some effects. The cut-off from Aviemore to Inverness via Carr Bridge was it was authorised in 1884, partly as I think of the pressure that the Glasgow North Western Railway had put on it, and partly as well because the Great North of Scotland Railway was also trying to make inroads there. But although it took them another 14 years before it was opened, so they obviously weren't in any great hurry to do anything about it. So it would have been a fabulous line if it had ever been built. Certainly would have liked to have travelled along it, but we never got the chance. And that, as far as that is the story of the Glasgow North Western Railway.
Thanks very much, Gilbert. It's a fascinating line, and whether it would have survived, who knows? If we move on, the next one, I know that person well. I'm going to move on now to a line which did get completed, but never got used. So in 150 years, it sat there as a rather expensive brick ornament. It's the viaduct, the Dudston Viaduct in Birmingham. It arose out of basically the two things. You had the Grand Junction before the forming of the London North Western. You had the Grand Junction and the London and Birmingham railways at loggerheads over rates. And the Grand Junction thought the London's excessive rates were hitting its trade down to the south, and it sought to link to the broad gauge and the Great Western at Oxford with a line from Birmingham to Oxford. What happened there's a long story, but to cut it short, obviously in the period 1846, the London North Western combined, and the two principal constituents were the Grand Junction, London and Birmingham, and peace broke out. But what you'd actually got was the Great Western trying to make inroads into Birmingham and the coalfields beyond, and it was seeking and had permission to come to Curzon Street. Now, you've got Curzon Street Wharf on this map. I mean, Curzon Street passenger station is just on the next sheet off to the left. And you've got to remember too that the Grand Junction at this time, this is before New Street was built, and that line, it went round the east of Birmingham, came round in a loop, and the London and Birmingham, to get it in the right chronological order, was contiguous with the Grand Junction there at Curzon Street. This idea would have been to bring a line up the Paddington route up through Oxford and also be alongside at Curzon Street. What was interesting was the Act later on actually forbid it to cross the London and Birmingham, so it made it completely inoperable. So what you were left with, and this is a map from 1889 survey. The interesting part is that it shows the viaduct in the bottom left, which would have crossed what became the London North Western main line on the level to go into Curzon Street. Never got complete, although the viaduct was, and the viaduct certainly was there when I was last in that part of the world, which is probably about 15 years ago. It's probably been flattened with HS2, I don't know, but this was certainly HS0 coming up, because the map to me it's interesting. It's got a little part of mixed gauge track just abandoned on its own. It was used as a siding from Bordsley, which is probably 2 miles away. There are more sidings you go further down the line, but although the line was built at great expense and you've got an extensive viaduct coming across in brick, which survived, it never got used other than as a very expensive siding. So the Snow Hill route took a different route. The Great Western never used it. So as a monument to waste, it takes some beating. But such were the railway politics of the day that I'm afraid there was a lot of money spent without any value at all. To get it a little bit more in perspective, if I may, I'll find what I've done with the mouse. That's it in great. You see coming, it would have come on the level straight across the line. The lines going off to the left are the ones that went into New Street, which are the route you're familiar with, New Street up to Wolverhampton, was 1852, 1854. So that post-dated it. The map itself, just give the sheet number. The other thing, just to put it in perspective, this too is a sheet from 1890 of Birmingham. If you hopefully can see, I might have to move. Sorry. The route is on the right. It's probably lost if you got the names everybody's crossed, but I mean that survived, and you can see right in the bottom right hand corner, GWR disused. It's a completely different route. You've got the line coming right across the middle. Show it, this coming down to the New Street, which is here, and the eventual Snow Hill route, totally different line coming across, and obviously Snow Hill's over here. So it's an interesting bit, which it's strange that in fact, I mean, it certainly was there in the early 2000s, and it just a strange survivor of something in, frankly, the centre of Birmingham that never got used. So that's it for that little diversion. The next one, if you got John Harmer ready?
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are. I'll take John is now going. We will get on to lines which were open. John's going to get on to closed lines in Sussex. John.
Yes, my offering for this evening is entitled Closed Rail Lines Now Put to New Uses. The two East Sussex rail lines in this presentation are from Polegate to Erridge and from Crowhurst to Bexhill-on-Sea. The first can be seen in this extract of Bartholomew's map of Sussex, dated 1959. Is it possible to put an arrow on up the left-hand side running north-south? You can see the black railway line that goes up from Polegate to Erridge. And then is it possible to put an arrow down into the bottom right-hand corner? You'll see the line from Crowhurst down to Bexhill-on-Sea. So that's just to give you an idea of where we're looking at. And now the first of these was, that's the Polegate to Erridge line. The first of these was built at the height of Victorian railway mania, with the Polegate to Helsham section being in use by 1849. Now, if we can look at the OS 1 to 25,000 map, circa 1960, it's probably not very clear, but is it possible to note the sharp, very sharp turn northwards as the line left the Polegate station on the east-west coastway line? Probably not possible to see it, is it?
No, can't quite. Sorry, can't
the route
quite
onwards. If we can look at the next OS 1 to 25,000, dated 1960. No, they're not coming up very clear, are they? was a very
They are after this slide.
was a very rural route from Helsham through to Heathfield. The towns grew up after the railway came. And then if we look at the third OS, 1 to 25,000, circa 1960, again, probably a bit difficult to see, but the section to Erridge being completed by 1880. After reaching Heathfield, the line inquired the name Cuckoo Line from the old tradition at Heffel Fair, Heffel being the old name for Heathfield, when supposedly an old woman released the first cuckoo of spring from her basket. The line was very popular with both freight and passengers until the 1920s, when lorries, buses and cars began to take a lot of the trade. In the 1960s, it was recommended for closure in the Beeching report. Passenger lines, trains were the first to go, with freight finally closing in 1968. In 1981, Wealdon District Council, in partnership with East Sussex County Council, bought the track bed from Polegate to Heathfield. That was when they had more money for special projects than they have now, to create an all-purpose, non-motorised recreational route shown in this photo. Have you got the photo with the
Now.
next slide? Yes. That's where it leaves Polegate, which has now become a very popular cuckoo trail, with the reminder in the next photo.
Which we don't see now.
Coming up.
No, it seems not to.
Have we got the next slide? No, not that.
No.
There should be a photo with the last 3 digits, 579.
No, I can't say I've got that one.
Oh, well, it should show.
Sorry, I don't know what's happened to that.
A piece of railway equipment now made use as a seat along the cuckoo trail.
Right.
Right. A small area north of Heathfield High Street has now been made into Millennium Green. We'll get the photo of that, Millennium Green.
No, this is the next slide, I'm afraid.
Oh. With the help of the parish council. Beyond towards Mayfield, the track bed is still visible at footpath crossings, but very overgrown. And north of what was Mayfield Station, it was used to construct the Mayfield bypass. Right, well, on to the second line featured in my presentation. This was a latecomer to railway construction, as the poster opening of the Crowhurst railway line.
No, don't know that either. The next one I've got is the OS map of Crowhurst.
Oh,
So
well, the opening of the Crowhurst to Bexhill line was shown in a poster. Right, so we're on to Bexhill now. So that's Crowhurst to Bexhill. From Crowhurst, which at that time had 4 platforms, and as you see, the map that's on there now, it shows where it left the main line from London to Hastings. I think you can see if an arrow can be put on there. That's it, Crowhurst, and then it branches off from the London to Hastings line is the one on the right, and the one that comes down straight down is the one to Bexhill. It was also one of the shortest branch lines and the shortest lived railways, as it closed under the Beeching cuts in 1964. In order to get from Crowhurst to its own Bexhill West Station, not joining on the Coastway line, it had to cross the Coombe Haven by an expensive viaduct After closure, this was blown up despite much local protest because it was too costly to maintain. In this century, part of the Bexhill town end was used to construct the Coombe Valley Way, which is a road, again despite much local protest. The greater part of the rural route remains a dismantled railway track without any particular designation. So that's my presentation. I'm sorry the pictures weren't able to come up, but
Yeah, sorry if you
I don't know where
missed
they
one or
got
two out
lost.
for you. Probably me. So anyway, apologies for that if I have dropped something off the presentation. But all interesting stuff. Thank you, John. Now we're
Are
going
there
to
any
go.
questions from?
We'll do the questions for everyone at the end, if we can. If I can
Okay,
move
thank you,
on
Stuart.
to some. Thanks for that, John. If we move on, very west of Sussex, in fact, over the Atlantic to Argentina, and to Michael Walsh. You all right, Michael?
Yeah, I'm unmuted and I'm using a screen speaker. So can I just confirm that I can be heard okay?
You're fine. Absolutely fine.
Great, thank you. So if you could put up whatever you have for me.
I'll get you out of Sussex and we'll get you into Argentina.
I was envisaging a slightly different type of display where I would have kind of control over my map. So what I should have done is take some grabs of portions of the map for enlargements. But firstly, to give you a little, that's fine.
I can, but the trouble is, I think I'm going
Just
to lose
pixelate.
the focus.
So maybe you go one step backward would be best. Anyway, I'm coming to maps really from the point of view of being a railway enthusiast, and I only came across the Charles Close Society for the first time about 20 years ago when the Society came to Ireland on a tour of libraries with maps, and it came to the Railway Records Society, of which I was then chairman. And I have to say I was quite fascinated by this new insight into the world of maps and mapping. And we had a journal exchange between our two societies, courtesy of Rodney, I've forgotten his surname, it'll come back in a moment, Rodney Leary. But when Rodney retired, I had to stop looking at the free journal that came my way and I joined the society. Excellent value and absolutely fascinated with all the stuff I read. So in 1975, I had a trip to Argentina with a friend, a British friend, now resident in the United States, and we had sundry adventures. It was not a good time to be there because the generals were throwing people out of helicopters, and there was a lot of martial law, and we had a number of encounters with police and security, including a day in a police station in Jujuy, which is in the very north of Argentina, pretty much left of center, about near the edge of the box showing the Buenos Aires area. Yep, you're nearly there. And so it rather spoiled what was a pretty wonderful trip in many ways, by train all the way from Buenos Aires right to the Bolivian border at La Quiaca, about 1,800 kilometers. So this map turned up at a book barrow fair in Dublin's Mansion House in September 1984. I saw it on a table and it cost me £3. It's distributed. It was sold by Stanford's, and if in the enlargement of the top you can see that. And Stanford's also have some representation in Argentina. There's an address given in Buenos Aires. But the map itself, and it's down in the very left-hand bottom, it does show in a better definition, is by Waterloo's. And it appears to be a map that was regularly produced by Waterloo's, sometimes just showing the Argentine railways without any client marking on it, but on other occasions actually marked for a specific railway company. So I've seen online examples of it for the Central Argentine Railway, which is the blue company, more or less in the middle of the map, running northwest from Buenos Aires right up to Tucumán with a very long main line. up to the northwest. Also the Buenos Aires and Pacific, which is the red one running west from Buenos Aires to the Chilean border at Mendoza, had some denominated issues of this map. And there was a third company, I think. No, the Southern didn't have a copy of it. But it was produced more or less from 1900 with various additions as the network expanded up to about 1930. I've seen quite a lot of examples online. Most of them are poor resolution, but there's a couple in the US Library of Congress that you can read or look at online in high res. And I suppose if you're not too worried about copyright, you could take screen grabs of it portion by portion. But to my mind, it's an absolutely beautiful railway map. The territory covered, as I say, is huge, but the use of color and the use of differentiation between broad gauge and narrow gauge, which is in the box down at the bottom, again, not going to show very well in what you're seeing, is really, really well done. So you can figure out what's going on in the map, which company is which, where the companies compete, where they overlap, where they intersect. And the use of color is pretty strong for most of the lines. The exception is the State Railway in the north, which is a kind of an insipid browny yellow color. It doesn't stand out as well as the Maynard, that the larger companies. The thing that's particularly curious about Argentina, for anyone who's familiar with the railway scene, is the multiplicity of gauges. The primary gauge used was the 5'6" broad gauge, not quite the same as Spanish gauge. There's a significant difference, but Spanish rolling stock can be used on the broad gauge in South America. But the network in the north was almost exclusively meter gauge up to the Bolivian border and across the top these territories up at the very north of the country. But the meter gauge railways also extended into Buenos Aires, and there were meter gauge railways south and west of Buenos Aires in territory where the meter gauge made absolutely no sense. That the pampas are pretty flat, the ground is so hard you don't need to use ballast, so why on earth burden yourself with a narrow gauge? Anyway, but it all existed. A very, very large percentage of it has disappeared. And with a local, not an engine man in the true sense of the word, in charge of Argentina, it's kind of a bit like America's going to apparently do. State operations of anything really are very much on the hit list. So that was the main slide. As I say, I misinterpreted the nature of the meeting, but we do have a couple of other slides, and thanks, Stuart, for putting that one up. That shows northern Argentina, and it comes from a map published by the Association of Latin American Railways in 1975. I think probably the only atlas they ever produced of South American rail systems. It's showing the north of Argentina, and the lines running up in red are broad gauge, coming up to Tucumán in the northwest. Everything else on the left 2/3 of the map was meter gauge. And then in Argentine Mesopotamia, which is between the River Paraná and the Uruguay, the lines are standard gauge. That was pretty much a self-contained network that linked with Paraguay and Brazil, where the lines were meter gauge. So it didn't really serve much purpose having this island of standard gauge, but it was big enough to be self-contained. This map also shows up at the very top northwest the line that came very late. It now survives in part as a tourist line, the railway to the clouds, and it's right up in the very top corner. It's a link between the north of Argentina and the Chilean network at Socompa, and with a route on down to Valparaiso. Still there, occasionally sees use. Absolutely amazing Andean railway. The territory is total desert, up around 13,000, 14,000 feet. And one of the stations is called the Dead German, which tells the tale of what happens if you try to walk your way across the desert. So if we look at the next slide, it'll take us farther south, I think, in Argentina. No, it's going north to Bolivia. We'll skip that one, please, and go to the next. This is the southern half of Argentina. Again, the red lines are broad gauge. The black on this map are mostly meter gauge, and the blue in Argentine Mesopotamia standard gauge. And the final picture will give us an enlargement of Buenos Aires province, which was very heavily covered with the railways. Four different companies: Argentine, Central Argentine in the north, Buenos Aires and Pacific running across to the left to the Chilean border, Buenos Aires Western going west into country that nobody knows anything about really outside Argentina, Pampas, backwards country, and the Great Southern, then the Southern Railway from Buenos Aires down to Bahia Blanca and a long penetration south. One peculiar line, Rosario is in the north, just left, right of center near the top, and Bahia Blanca is down at the bottom. And a railway was built, broad gauge, from Rosario to Bahia Blanca, and it cut across every other radial line running inland from Buenos Aires. And it was carefully planned that from any point on its route, it was a shorter journey to the port at Rosario or Bahia Blanca. So it was to tap shipping, a bit like South Wales, some of the lines there that tried to tap different flows of coal. You can also see there's some green routes in Buenos Aires province, and they're meter gauge, which, as I said, made really no sense at all given the territory that's in it. And that's a very brief survey of Argentine railways. I made an attempt to photograph the 30 little stuck-on panels on the cloth Stanford's map and stitch them together to make a montage, as you will see in some of the railway clearinghouse maps have been assembled in that sort of way. All I can say, it's much more difficult than it seemed. And the result wasn't really as good as I would have hoped, but I'll try again, and hopefully at some stage I might have a really good big montage of this map where you can read every single detail. So thank you for listening, and I hope that the little account of a very distant land, but with very British railways, because the companies were mostly British owned and run for a long period, has been of some interest.
No, thanks very much, Michael. And yeah, it is unfortunate, but with stitching together all the panels, you rather had a crisscross of white lines, unfortunately, which is a pity because the definition on them, other than that, was really good. But thank you for that. Now we're going to move on. And this is to Will Messenger and W.S. Redfern's phenomenal map. So, Will, take it from here. Well, not as the case may be. You're muted,
Right.
Will.
Good evening.
Good. Excellent.
First slide, please. I apologise for the poor resolution on this. This is actually not my map, but thanks to Stuart, when we first talked about presenting this, he latched on to a fellow in Chicago who had something very similar. So mine is virtually like this, and I feel quite stupid because you could call this just a bog standard map of the Greater London area produced by or for the District Railway. However, my copy sat in the back of a cupboard for about 50 years. I was going through my London Underground map collection and found an index card that made reference to this, went hunting, and then started investigating. Next slide, please. One problem is its size. Gilbert's Glasgow and North Western Railway map
is bigger than this, but here is the map itself, but I've photocopied little bits so that I can study it in parts. So that was Curtis Wright of Chicago. And next slide, please. This is the cover of my map. And over on the right, you've got W.S. Redfern, calls himself the Map Man. 89 Islip Street is still an ordinary house, no sign of commercial use. We'll come back to that later. And then over on the left, a memo, or I suppose that's short for memorial, advertising S.L. Davison. But I've never been able to find out anything about either of these people. I'm hoping to go up to the London Archive sooner or later and dig and delve in post office directories and the like. And I'm sure I will find something, but he's a bit enigmatic. Next slide, please. If we look at the map in detail in parts, bottom left, railways over which district railway trains run, shown in red. And that's a pretty heavy hint of what the map is all about. And one or two around this period have this little inset for Henley and Reading area, although in a peculiar way, none of that seems to be district railway, so quite why the district railway thought it was worth putting that in, I can't quite understand. Next slide, please. So district railway lines distinguished in red, others in blue, but electric railways in also blue with little blue blobs for the stations. Next slide. So on the cover of my map, Redfern has pasted this puff for his work, Redfern's phenomenal map of 1,000 square miles around London. Quite boastful in a way, but maybe that was the times. Next slide, please. If we look at parts of the map, there's a particularly interesting area where the Ealing and South Harrow Railway crosses the Great Western, and at that junction, for a short period, 1903 to 1906 or 7, you had the Royal Agricultural Society showground. Interestingly, RAS made 2 attempts to have a permanent site on the fringes of London. 1879, they set up at Queen's Park. Queen's Park, of course, named after Queen Victoria. On that occasion, the event was a washout. They had to build a causeway to keep the Queen dry. And then when they came to what is now Park Royal, the line was supposed to open 23rd of June 1903. Heavy rain caused embankment failure. Everything closed, and they just about managed to keep a service going. Now that was electric, but this map doesn't tell you that that was electrified. So there are sort of enigmas in this map. Next slide, please. I've partly included this because if you look in the top right-hand corner, you can see, well, it's Harrow and Wealdstone Station, and below that is a road with a bend, which is Marlborough Hill. And if you trace 2/3 of the way west, that's where I was born. So I have a vested interest in this area, but more importantly, if we go down to the bottom right, we've got the loop on the Great Western, which was extended to Greenford, and then the Metropolitan Railway opened the Uxbridge branch June 1904, with electric services coming 6 months later. Now, Ickenham is shown, but no Ickenham station. There's Ruislip, and there should be a little square box on the south side of the Great Western. It's not there. That was opened 25th of September 1905. So we begin to home in on the likely date of the map. And then just below Ruislip, you've got the joint line, the Great Western and, let me get it right, Great Central. So there they are. Next slide, please. And now we're looking at central London. There is a big, rather squashed, but real geographic central line, circle line. And then across the centre, Stuart, can you mark it? Although many will be familiar with Hyde Park, there is the Central London Railway. And if you look closely, you can see it's a solid line. So the Central London Railway is open. But then, Stuart, this is a test for you if you're not a Londoner. Bakerloo line running down from Baker Street.
Not running there, isn't it?
Sorry, yeah, no.
Let's get back to where we were.
Where we were.
The Bakerloo line, yeah, we're coming down from there.
Yeah. There's the Bakerloo line dotted. There's what is now the Northern line dotted. They both show the stations, and to the south of Hyde Park is the Great Northern Piccadilly and Brompton Railway, yet to be opened. So we can look at the dates of all of those. And so this map, to me, is quite an exciting time. We've come through all of the period of the American influence and the Yerkes shenanigans, if you like, but American money getting tube lines going. Next slide, please. Interestingly, this map shows routes that were never built, and middle of the slide up to the north, you can see Cricklewood over in the northwest, and straight down the Edgware Road, otherwise known as the A5. And what did the Romans call it? Icknield Street, was it? And right down the middle is a dotted line for the Northwest London Railway, which was proposed but never built, apparently because of financial turmoil due to the Second Boer War. And then I think next slide, please. Thank you, Colin. Watling Street, I should have known. Just an aside, the crossings under the railway shown in quite detail with Greenwich Subway, opened 4th of August 1902. So really quite easy to date the map, or at least date when it was mapped. Next slide, please. And then we show two other tube lines, City and South London Railway, which of course is the beginnings of the Northern, and maybe we can pick that up. Easiest to see it coming, well, there we are, on the London Southwestern Railway. So that survives, but running due north to the right of the oval from Brixton up round to Elephant and Castle. If you can see that dotted line, that was the City and Brixton Railway. And as we've heard before, lots of high hopes, very complicated story, which I've tried to unpick. And there was a guy called Harry Lawson, and I've got a feeling that that line was left on the map because of the court case in relation to the National Electric Traction Company, and Lawson was found guilty of fraud as late as 1904. But it's a bit peculiar why that line to Brixton was included at this point, when it had basically lost any hope of being built long before that. Next slide, please. Now, fortunately, I live not too far from the Bodleian Library, and I'm on nodding acquaintance with the maps curator, Nick Millier, who I believe is a fellow member of this society. And I have to acknowledge the kindness and effort put in by many of that institution. And so 2 weeks ago, I was able to go into the bod. There's my map on the front. Remember the one I showed earlier had a red splodge on it. Mine is slightly different, but placing it alongside two others. Next slide, please. We've got my so-called Redfern's phenomenal map. Then B in the middle there is another of the Bodleian collection, a 1902 first edition. And then C, the one at the top, is identical to mine, a second edition of the Greater London and Environs, dated 1904. But notice top left corner, there's a portion missing from that top one because the cover of that map is loose. So I'm rather pleased mine has been sitting in a cupboard and not suffered much damage. This is the cover of Curtis Wright's map. The fellow in Chicago kindly sent me images, and we've got Redfern's paste downs, but sort of happily, the cover of the Chicago map has apparently suffered some water damage, and this has lifted Redfern's paste downs and gives you just enough. So we've got district, again in inverted commas, and there a little bit of metropolitan district. So what we appear to have is a bog standard district railway publication plastered all over with Redfern's paste downs, including advertising the Great Thoughts magazine. Next slide, please. So thanks again to Curtis Wright. Next slide. Now, once in the bod, I was able to compare my maps with, I think there are 25 on the table waiting for me when I return again. And here is a fairly pristine cover showing that what's hidden by Redfern's paste downs is district map of Greater London environs, as the titles on the maps themselves show. It's a first edition dated 1904, although there's another first edition dated 1902, so things get a bit complicated. Next slide, please. So that's oh no, Eve, can you deal with that? That's her son calling. Can you kill it?
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where what? Sorry, my apologies, everybody. Yeah. Right. So there's my cover with a tiny fragment missing, revealing the two. And you can see that miraculously, Redfern must have used a really sophisticated adhesive, because the underlying cover is, or looks, really clean. Next slide. Now, this advertisement gives us a precise date, October 1904. So there's a contradiction, because the district map must have been produced late 1903, early 1904. The advertisement can't be earlier than October 1904. So what it seems to hint at is that Redfern has picked up some out-of-date maps, some surplus maps, and done this pasting up and passed them off as his own. Next slide. So this is from Curtis Wright's map. It gives Redfern at 302 Kentish Town Road. So where he was commercially is now either an Iceland supermarket or a McDonald's fast food outlet. So the buildings for the Kentish Town site have gone, even though his home just round the corner is still standing. Now, if we look at the small print, at the top, a 2 guinea map of the British Isles, and he really seems to be wanting to push this sacrifice for 5 shillings. At one point, I thought sacrifice meant that it was something to do with the production of the map, but I think it's a late Victorian way of saying, well, no, Edwardian way of saying, I'm letting this go cheap. So for a short time only, to tide over pressing emergency. We may never know what pressing emergency was getting Redfern to make these claims. Next slide, please. However, Redfern's Guinea map of Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, and so on is actually the District Railway map of Greater London environs at a scale of 1 inch to 1 mile. That's my map. And then the one below is the sort of sister map, if you like, at 4 inches to 1 mile. So there you can see Redfern is saying his map, paths through the parks large enough to show a man sitting on a seat. Well, Redfern didn't do that. Quite how the maps were produced, I'm not yet sure, but next slide, please. My digging and delving builds up the picture of past interest in maps of the District Railway. So quite a lot of the maps donated to the Bodleian have a J prefix. There's a list of some, and they are from one John de Monins Johnson, who died in 1956. And it looks as though his estate took quite a long time to get sorted out, because the donation to the bod was 12 years after he died. Then Ralph Hyde, and I'd love to hear from other people who know anything about Ralph Hyde and his efforts. He produced printed maps of Victorian London up to 1900 and usefully extended it into the 1900s to include all of the Metropolitan District Railway maps. And alongside him, David Garnett, who produced notes of some description in the Journal of the Railway and Canal Historical Society. I'm intending to join them, if only for a year, because I can then get access to David Garnett's work. Now, jumping to number 5 on that page, Mike Horn, the writer of the excellent 2-volume book on the Metropolitan District Railway. He died sadly in 2020 and produced a tentative cartobibliography about a year before he passed away. He was clearly familiar with Ralph Hyde's work and David Garnett's, but he makes no reference to Burwood and Brady, and happily, the 1983 edition of their concise catalogue is on the open shelves in the Bodleian. So I've got good access to that. So my journey in trying to work out what that map is all about has answered a lot of questions. It's a bog standard district railway map of 1904, but who the heck is Redfern? How did he come to pass off these things as his own? So many, many questions. And part of my purpose in doing this little presentation is I'm sure there are long-standing members of CCS or other bodies who probably know far more than me, but I hope to carry on working towards updating the record with many, many threads that can be picked up. Just to finish, when the other people were producing their work, the Guildhall Library was there. That became the London Metropolitan Archive. That's now the London Archive. And so some repositories have changed and some material has been moved about. I could go on and on and on, but Stuart, thank you. I won't.
No, thank you, Will. And I'm sure if we've got anyone which has any answers to your question 1 and 2, then we know where to contact.
Thank
If
you.
we move on quickly to Jerry, who's going to have a little helter-skelter through the underground, but not too long.
Thank you.
It's a backhanded way of saying thanks. The floor is yours, Jerry.
Thanks. Well, this is a very light-hearted and speedy romp through a few slides that Stuart has allowed me to choose out of the pile I sent him rather ungraciously. Redfern's address, incidentally, is less than a mile from here, so he might have been a sub-agent to Sampson Lowe, who did the district maps, which was itself really an advertising company. It's a bit like a deal I did over some old London Transport Central London maps, where I had Zeal Media printed on it by a huckster who was a sort of surplus sales agent to the company that produced them. But enough, onwards.
Thank you, Jerry.
This is okay. I'll report back if I find out more. It's at the back of the station, the Islip Street address, by the way. This we're looking at dates from 1908. It's the second or third spread in a booklet called Underground, in the mosaic style of the top of this page. Street and railway map in sections, twopence, and it's produced by, I nearly said Nelson Riddle. Who do I mean? Johnson Riddle.
Johnson.
It's a very early example of a very clear, I think, underground railway map. The colours are different from what we know now, of course. It's on the next spread, has a wonderful example of that famous poster map, which was called No Need to Ask a Policeman. And the underground electric railways were proudly showing the map on the wall and the policeman pointing some inquirers of it. Next one. This, if I'm not wrong, is one that came out at random from our digital library. It looks very much to me like Beck's first edition with Cockfoster's opening in midsummer 1933. The colours look a bit off to us, so it's probably been digitally stewed. But I thought we should bow towards the great Harry Beck. And the next one. Here's one you may not have seen. It's, of course, a geographical representation of a recent state of the underground, and utterly different from what we tend to think. But aren't the Epping and Met lines enormously long?
Yeah.
You know that already. It's by Simon Clark, and it was done in 2000. Next, please. This is a bit more recent, to show how broad-minded TfL can be. I think this beats the present iteration of the underground map myself, but it's I don't know where anything is. You go west to go east at the top. It's by John Hunter, this, and again, it was TfL's publication in February last year. Next. Here's one that you hardly ever see. It was done likewise on the overground lines, which are then known only as the overground rather than the present confusing names. But here again, one goes east to get to Watford, which is kind of curious. But on the face of it, it looks very symmetrical and very clear. You might not have seen that before. Do we have any more, or is that it, Stuart? Aha! Over to you. You are Boyle. You know how to spell tube?
You know how to spell tube, and when you get over here, the show and tells that are done by Jerry are there at Clwyd Hell. Right.
Kentish Town, folks.
Highgate.
Not sure what Tanthaerol means. I went to look that up for you.
Tanthaerol Underground.
Oh, is it? Well done.
Yeah.
Splendid.
Right.
Do you know who did it?
No, I don't. I was sent it. I obviously did. I applaud. I mean, it's certainly different.
I shall have to put my order into Chris Higley, I think. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, thank all the speakers. I'll stop screen sharing. Do we have anything in chat? We do have something in chat. What do we have? Watling Street. Yeah, we did that.
Thank you for that correction.
We got any others in chat? Is that it?
I think we've. Does anyone want to unmute and raise anything themselves, please? Please do so now. It's 9 o'clock. The time is yours, really, but we aim to finish by 9. And but let's take some questions if anyone still has some.
Just to say to Will, I knew he knew, but these things escape us sometimes.
Thank you.
Hello, could I ask about about Mayfield and the cuckoo line?
Yeah.
My question is that I wanted to cycle between Heathfield and Erridge, and it's incredibly hilly. I just wonder really whether you would know possibly if there is any intention to try and use as much as is remaining of the northern bit from Heathfield as a cycle track, because it makes an incredibly important link to avoid the horrendous hills for cyclists in that area. I mean, I've too have seen the part of the track bed there out of use and wondered really why it wasn't purchased as well and converted.
Can John tell us? Would you like to unmute John, John Harmer?
Hello?
Yeah, that's it.
Did you catch that question, John?
Are there any questions for me? I haven't got
Yes.
any questions to make.
No, don't worry.
Did you hear my spoken question? Did you hear my spoken question, which was it's very hilly north of Heathfield towards Erridge, and I've tried to cycle in that area, and it's really difficult. And it struck me as tragic that the rest of the line, or as much as is possible, maybe obviously not right by Mayfield, could be a cycle track. I just wonder if you knew any possible thoughts about why that wasn't done, or whether it could be done one day.
Can you give an answer to that, John?
I couldn't catch that.
North of Heathfield.
You're very muffled, speaker. I don't know who you are. I can't do anything about it.
Roger Smith.
Thank you.
So north of Heathfield, is it a bit clearer now?
A little.
Yeah. It's very, very hilly, and I just wondered if the speaker knows whether why it was not that the track bed in that area was not made into a cycle track, or whether it could be. That's all.
I think we've got a disconnect here.
I think we're started losing.
I don't know whether you can hear me. As far as the Cuckoo Trail is concerned, I would go and approach either Sustrans, who are the cycle charity, or Cycling UK, who have been promoting the Cuckoo Trail quite strongly. So those would be the sources of information if you want to know.
Yeah, so I understand that, but I just thought the speaker might know, given that he did refer to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Well, let's try another question. Anyone?
Gilbert.
Jerry, just let me just I see Rob's comment there, saying he suspects the map was intended for an agent drumming up support from landowners. I mean, that may well be the case. I really have no idea of the history of it. All I would say is, though, if this copy was in the hands of James Thompson, who was, as I said, the general manager of the Caledonian Railway, who was one of the opposing parties, I think it was probably a copy that was being used to know what your enemy was doing, rather than one that was for drumming up support. But there may be other copies of this map of which he obtained a copy. I have no idea of the history there. And one other small point, Will mentions David Garnett's articles in the Railway and Canal Historical Society. I think I'm right in saying that if you go to their website, everything apart from the last 2 years in terms of their journals, etc., is freely available. So I think you can probably find the articles there. And there's some quite good indexes there as well, if my memory serves me correctly.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
£25 is well worth it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to dissuade you from joining. I'm just saying you can probably go in there later on tonight if you want.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Okay. I think we've just hit
Steve.
9 o'clock. So we take one more if there is one.
One more question, anyone?
Yes, please. Can I have there's a question for Jerry.
Tony.
I was intrigued by that circular overground map. I've never seen it before. Who is it published by, Jerry? I've never seen it. It's remarkable.
TfL.
Use of the diagrammatic mind.
Yeah. Did you say overground or underground? Tony?
Overground, where you go east to Watford.
I regret to say that my digital photo library is in turmoil. I managed to find some loony transport maps for tonight, but I can't tell you where they came from.
Oh,
It was not, that was not a TfL production. It was, I think, enthusiasts.
oh, I see.
It
Right.
it wasn't the anti-renaming brigade, but I think a lot of people are thinking a lot of things about how to better show underground.
And the underground map,
I'm sorry.
the Beck map published in Welsh, was that produced for a particular Welsh event in London, or attracting lots of?
That's just a bit of someone with knowledge of the Welsh language having a bit of fun.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
So I've
we
never seen
included
any
because
reference to it.
it's slightly different.
Do we
I
know?
do-
Sorry, Tony.
I've got quite an extensive collection of underground maps. I've never seen that one before.
No.
Wondering whether
No,
it
I
was.
have never.
You mentioned all these Celts turning up. Where's Paddington and so on.
Well, there was a time when London Transport did about 6 European languages, separate languages for the underground map. Never mind buses. Those were the glory.
Good Lord, really?
Yeah, they were glory days. But you think about it, it was only the index and the instructions that needed any foreign languages. But Stuart, do you know where that tube map came from?
No, I was sent it.
I love the spelling.
I do have a little interest in the Welsh language, and somebody sent it to me, but where they got it, I don't know. I just included it as a bit of a fun.
Yes. I think Chris Higley, if you're still watching, you could sell a few of those.
Anyway, thank you.
I did a quick search for map tube with the Welsh spelling, which led me to a BBC Wales article on it in Welsh, but it did have a not too well concealed link to a website with a high-res version, which is part of assets.londonist.com.
Oh, Londonist, yes, apparently.
And one or two stations are actually surprisingly familiar, like Park Holland, I think, or Park Cannon.
Oh, but surely Park would be spelt with a C, wouldn't it?
Oh yes, but it's eminently recognisable, whereas a lot of them are not.
Fair enough.
Fair
enough.
Well, I think I better let you all. Thank all the speakers so much for all that you've put into that. It's been an interesting evening.
Can I second that?
Thank you, and I think we'll need to call it a night. There's one thing you can always say when it's a Zoom meeting: you can all have a safe journey home.
Well, can I just chip in as your society chairman and your usual Zoom chairman, and thank tonight's chairman, Stuart, who's put a heck of a lot of work into this. And we missed you when you were under the cosh in January. We're delighted to delay it till now because it's been such a good show, and we must do it again sometime. Railways are always popular, and thank you especially, and to the other half dozen speakers tonight. Thank you so much. I want everyone to think now about Rob's article, Rob Wheeler's article in Sheetlines this week, as to how you get circular pairs of railway rails, I should say. It's a real puzzle there. I think the engraver had one too many myself. Either that, or it's Rob's theory of, what was it, pirouetting coal trucks. Good night to all of you.
Good night, all.
Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Good night.
Good night.
I'll take us offline, Stuart.